The black crepe veil that hung from her hat moved slightly in the hot afternoon breeze as Natalie Porter stepped down from the train onto the wooden platform of Montrose, Colorado, her trembling hands clutching a worn leather satchel that contained everything she owned in this world. The year was 1884, and the dusty frontier town spread out before her like a painting rendered in shades of brown and gold. The San Juan Mountains rising dramatically in the distance against an impossibly blue sky. She had traveled nearly 2,000 miles from Philadelphia to marry a man she had never met, exchanging letters for 3 months with someone who promised her a fresh start and a home. But the telegram that arrived at her boarding house 2 weeks ago had changed everything in an instant. "Miss Porter." A deep voice cut through her thoughts, and she turned to see a tall man standing a respectful distance away, his weathered face partially shaded by a wide-brimmed hat. He was perhaps 27 or 28 years old, with sun-darkened skin and eyes the color of honey that held both kindness and sorrow. "I'm Benjamin Hayes. I worked the ranch next to Thomas Whitfield's spread." Natalie's throat tightened at the mention of her intended husband's name. The telegram had been brief and devastating. Thomas Whitfield had been thrown from his horse and broke his neck 3 days before she was scheduled to arrive. The message had come from someone named Hayes, explaining the situation and offering to meet her train anyway, to help her decide what to do next. She had almost turned back, almost stayed in Philadelphia where at least the streets were familiar, but there was nothing left for her there either. "Mr. Hayes," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you for coming." Benjamin removed his hat, revealing thick, dark hair that needed cutting. "I'm real sorry about Thomas. He was a good man, talked about you constantly these past months. Had the whole house fixed up, everything ready." He paused, his expression pained. "I know this must be terrible for you coming all this way." "I never met him," Natalie said quietly, then felt guilty for the admission. "But his letters were kind, I had hoped." She trailed off, unsure what she had hoped for anymore. Behind her veil, tears threatened, but she had cried enough in the past 2 weeks. She was 23 years old and utterly alone in the world. Her parents had died of cholera the previous winter, and her only sister had married and moved to California. The boarding house where she worked as a seamstress barely provided enough for rent and food. Thomas Whitfield's letters had offered something she desperately needed: hope. Benjamin shifted his weight, clearly uncomfortable. "The thing is, Miss Porter, I know you probably want to head back east on the next train, and I'd understand that completely. But if you need some time to think things through, to rest up and figure out your next move, my offer stands. New beginnings start here if you want them. Montrose is growing fast. We've got decent people, opportunities for someone skilled with a needle. I know Thomas mentioned you were a seamstress. The town could use someone with that talent." She looked up at him properly for the first time, studying his face through the gauze of her veil. There was genuine concern in his eyes, no trace of pity or improper interest, just a straightforward decency that reminded her of her father. "I don't have money for lodging while I think things over, Mr. Hayes. I spent nearly everything I had on the train ticket here. The boarding house on Main Street is run by Vera Thompson. She's a good woman, fair-minded. I already talked to her about your situation, and she said you could have a room for a week without charge, provided you help with some mending she needs done. After that, well, we can figure something out if you decide to stay." He gestured toward the street where a wagon waited, hitched to 2 sturdy horses. "I can take you there now, let you get settled." Natalie hesitated. Everything in her wanted to flee back to familiar territory, but what awaited her in Philadelphia? More loneliness, more struggling to make ends meet, more empty rooms and empty days. At least here, no one knew her story. No one would look at her with the mixture of sympathy and judgment that her neighbors back east had offered when she announced her plans to become a mail-order bride. Here she could be anyone she chose to be. "All right," she said finally. "I'll stay for a few days at least. Thank you for your kindness." Benjamin's shoulders relaxed slightly and he offered her a small smile. "Let me get your trunk." "This is all I have," Natalie replied, lifting the satchel slightly. She had sold or given away nearly everything before leaving Philadelphia, keeping only her clothes, sewing supplies, and a few precious photographs. Something flickered across Benjamin's face, an emotion she could not quite read, before he nodded and led her toward the wagon. He helped her up onto the seat with careful courtesy, making sure she was settled before climbing up beside her. The springs creaked as he released the brake and clicked his tongue at the horses, guiding them down the dusty main street of Montrose. The town was smaller than Natalie had expected, but showed signs of prosperity and growth. False-fronted buildings lined both sides of the wide street, their wooden facades freshly painted. She saw a general store, a bank, a blacksmith shop with its doors thrown open to reveal the glow of the forge inside, a saloon with bright letters proclaiming it the Golden Eagle, and various other establishments that suggested a community establishing itself for the long term. People moved along the boardwalks, going about their business, and several turned to look at the wagon as it passed, their gazes curious but not unfriendly. "That's the church," Benjamin said, pointing to a white building with a modest steeple at the far end of town. "Reverend Collins preaches there on Sundays. Next to it is the schoolhouse. We've got about 20 children in town now, and the teacher, Miss Caldwell, does a fine job with them." He continued his informal tour as they drove, identifying various buildings and mentioning names that meant nothing to Natalie yet, but might become familiar if she stayed. The boarding house was a 2-story structure painted pale yellow with white trim, surrounded by a picket fence that enclosed a small garden where vegetables grew in neat rows. A sign hanging from the porch announced it as Thompson's boarding house in elegant script. Benjamin pulled the wagon to a stop and helped Natalie down, retrieving her satchel before she could reach for it. The front door opened, and a woman in her 50s emerged, wiping her hands on her apron. She had iron-gray hair pulled back in a practical bun and sharp blue eyes that assessed Natalie in a single glance. "This must be Miss Porter," she said, her voice warm despite her no-nonsense demeanor. "I'm Vera Thompson. Benjamin told me about your situation, dear. Come inside out of this heat." Natalie followed her into the house, grateful for the relative coolness inside. The front hall was clean and welcoming, with wallpaper showing tiny flowers and a staircase leading to the upper floor. The smell of baking bread drifted from somewhere in the back of the house. "I'll show you to your room," Vera said. "It's nothing fancy, but it's clean and quiet. You look exhausted, child. When did you last eat?" "This morning," Natalie replied, though in truth she had only managed a few bites of bread. Her stomach had been in knots for days. "Well, supper is at 6 o'clock sharp. We sit down together, all of us who board here. Currently, that's myself, a railroad surveyor named Mr. Jennings, and a school teacher, Miss Caldwell. Simple fare, but plenty of it." Vera started up the stairs, and Natalie followed, conscious of Benjamin's boots on the steps behind them. The room was indeed simple, containing a narrow bed covered with a handmade quilt, a dresser with a mirror, a washstand with a pitcher and basin, and a small window that looked out over the back garden. A rag rug covered the wooden floor, and lace curtains filtered the afternoon sunlight into gentle patterns on the walls. "The necessary is out back, and there's a bathing room at the end of the hall," Vera explained. "Water for washing is in the pitcher, and I'll bring up hot water for a proper bath after supper if you like. Benjamin mentioned you're a seamstress, and I've got a basket of mending that's been piling up for months. Nothing urgent, but if you're willing to tackle some of it, that'll more than cover your room and board for the week. I'd be happy to help, Natalie said, setting her satchel on the bed. It's very generous of you to take me in like this. Vera waved a hand dismissively. We look after each other out here. That's how it works in a town like Montrose. You rest now and I'll see you at supper. She left the room, her footsteps fading down the hall. Benjamin lingered in the doorway, his hat in his hands. I know this isn't what you expected, Miss Porter. But I meant what I said. If you need anything while you're deciding what to do, you can find me at the Hayes Ranch. It's about 3 miles west of town, right where the road forks near the creek. Anyone can give you directions. Why are you being so kind to me? Natalie asked suddenly. You don't know me at all. He was quiet for a moment, turning his hat in his hands. Thomas was a good friend. He was so happy about you coming, about starting a family, building a life. When he died, I felt like I owed it to him to make sure you were all right. And besides, he added with a slight smile, it's the right thing to do. You came all this way in good faith. Least we can do is help you land on your feet. After he left, Natalie removed her veil and hat, then sat on the edge of the bed, her hands folded in her lap. The black dress she wore was heavy and hot, but it felt appropriate somehow, mourning for a man she had never met and a future that had died before it could begin. She thought about Thomas Whitfield's letters, still tucked in her satchel. He had written about his ranch, his horses, his dreams of raising cattle and building something lasting. He had asked careful, respectful questions about her life, her hopes, her fears. And now he was buried in the Montrose cemetery, and she was sitting in a strange room in a strange town, trying to figure out what came next. The tears came then, hot and silent, running down her cheeks unchecked. She cried for Thomas, for herself, for the peculiar grief of losing someone who existed only in words on paper. She cried for her parents, for the life she had left behind, for the uncertainty that stretched ahead like an unmarked trail. When the tears finally stopped, she felt emptied out but strangely lighter, as if something had loosened inside her chest. She washed her face in the basin, then unpacked her few belongings, hanging her 2 other dresses in the small wardrobe and arranging her sewing supplies in the top drawer of the dresser. The photographs she set on the dresser itself. Her parents on their wedding day, stiff and formal in their finest clothes, and one of herself with her sister Margaret, taken the summer before Margaret married and moved away. Looking at those images, Natalie felt the distance of miles and time like a physical weight. A soft knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called, and Vera entered carrying a large wicker basket. "This is the mending," she said, setting it on the bed. "Take your time with it, no rush. But I thought you might want something to occupy your hands, help settle your mind. I always find sewing to be soothing when things are difficult." Natalie looked through the basket and found shirts with torn seams, dresses that needed hemming, a tablecloth with a burn hole that would require careful patching, honest work that she knew how to do well. "I can start on these tomorrow," she said. "Thank you, Mrs. Thompson. Call me Vera, dear." "Everyone does." She paused at the door. "Benjamin Hayes is a good man, in case you're wondering. He runs his ranch alone since his father passed 2 years back. Works hard, keeps to himself mostly, but he's always first to help when someone needs it. The whole town respects him." After Vera left, Natalie lay down on the bed, intending to rest for just a few minutes, but exhaustion claimed her immediately. She slept deeply and dreamlessly until the sound of voices downstairs woke her. The light coming through the window had shifted, turning golden with approaching evening. She rose quickly, splashed more water on her face, and pinned her hair back into order before making her way downstairs. The dining room held a long table set with mismatched but clean dishes. Vera was bringing in platters of fried chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans, and fresh bread. A thin man with spectacles sat at one end of the table, a sheaf of papers beside his plate, and a young woman with auburn hair sat across from him, watching Natalie with friendly curiosity. "There you are," Vera said. "Everyone, this is Miss Natalie Porter. She'll be staying with us for a bit." "Natalie, this is Samuel Jennings, who's surveying routes for the railroad, and Caroline Caldwell, our schoolteacher." "Pleased to meet you," Caroline said warmly, gesturing to the empty chair beside her. "Please sit here." The meal was delicious, and Natalie found herself eating more than she had in days, drawn in by the easy conversation around the table. Samuel talked about his work mapping the terrain for potential rail expansions, and Caroline shared amusing stories about her students. Vera kept everyone's plates full and steered the conversation with practiced ease, never once asking Natalie about her circumstances or why she was in Montrose. It was exactly the kind of normalcy Natalie needed. After supper, while helping clear the dishes, Caroline touched Natalie's arm gently. "I hope this isn't too forward, but Benjamin mentioned you're a seamstress. I've been trying to make a dress for months, and I'm hopeless with a needle. Would you be willing to help me with it? I can pay you, of course." "I'd be happy to help," Natalie said, grateful for the offer of work. "I'm not sure how long I'll be staying, but while I'm here, I'd welcome the occupation." "Wonderful. I'll bring the fabric and pattern by tomorrow." Caroline's smile was genuine and warm, and Natalie felt a small spark of something that might have been hope. That night, lying in bed and listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the house settling around her, Natalie made a decision. She would stay in Montrose for the week Vera had offered, would do the mending and help Caroline with her dress, and would give this strange town a fair chance. If it felt right, if she could see a future here, she would find a way to make it work. And if not, at least she would have tried. The next morning dawned clear and bright, and Natalie woke early, accustomed to rising with the sun from her years in the boarding house in Philadelphia. She dressed in one of her simpler dresses, a gray cotton that was more practical than her morning black, and went downstairs to find Vera already in the kitchen, kneading dough for the day's bread. "Good morning," Vera said. "Coffee's on the stove, help yourself. Did you sleep well?" "Better than I expected," Natalie admitted, pouring herself a cup of the strong, hot coffee. "Thank you again for your hospitality." "Nonsense. It's a pleasure to have another woman in the house. Caroline boards here during the school term, but come summer she goes back to Denver to visit her family. Gets lonely with just the menfolk around." Vera shaped the dough into loaves and set them aside to rise. "If you're wanting to start on that mending today, feel free to work out on the back porch. It's shaded and catches a nice breeze." Natalie spent the morning doing exactly that, settling into the comfortable rhythm of needle and thread, her fingers moving with practiced efficiency through the pile of damaged garments. The work was familiar and soothing, requiring just enough attention to keep her mind occupied but not so much that she couldn't let her thoughts wander. She found herself thinking about Benjamin Hayes, wondering about him despite herself. He had kind eyes and a gentle manner, but there was something else there too, a quiet strength that suggested he was not a man to be underestimated. Around mid-morning, a shadow fell across her work, and she looked up to find Benjamin himself standing at the bottom of the porch steps, his hat in his hands. "Morning, Miss Porter," he said. "I hope I'm not disturbing you." "Not at all." Natalie set aside the shirt she was mending. "Did you need something? I wanted to show you Thomas's ranch if you're willing." His lawyer, Mr. Davidson, arrived in town yesterday from Gunnison, and he needs to settle the estate. There are some decisions to be made, and I thought you should see the place before you have to make them." Natalie's stomach tightened with anxiety. "What kind of decisions? Maybe we should take that ride, and I'll explain on the way." His voice was gentle but serious. "It won't take long. We can be there and back by early afternoon." She hesitated, then nodded. Vera appeared in the doorway, having overheard the conversation. "Go on, dear. This mending isn't going anywhere, and take a hat, that sun is fierce today." 20 minutes later, Natalie found herself sitting beside Benjamin in his wagon again, this time heading out of town on a dusty road that led west into rolling hills dotted with sagebrush and juniper. The mountains rose in the distance, their peaks still touched with snow despite the summer heat. Benjamin let the horses set their own pace, his hands relaxed on the reins. "Thomas's will is straightforward," he said after a while. "He left everything to you." Natalie's head snapped toward him. "What? But we weren't married, we hadn't even met." "Doesn't matter. He changed his will after you agreed to come west, named you as his heir. The ranch, the livestock, the house, and everything in it, it's all yours now if you want it." Benjamin glanced at her, his expression unreadable. "That's why Mr. Davidson needs to speak with you. You can accept the inheritance or refuse it. If you refuse, everything gets sold at auction to settle any debts, and whatever's left goes to some distant cousin back in Missouri." "I don't understand," Natalie said slowly. "Why would he do that? He didn't know me. He believed in you. In the future you would have built together." Benjamin was quiet for a moment. Thomas was an optimistic man, maybe too much so. He believed things would work out the way they were supposed to, and he wanted to make sure you were taken care of no matter what. The road curved around a stand of cottonwoods, and suddenly the ranch spread out before them. It was more beautiful than Natalie had imagined from Thomas's letters. The house was a sturdy log structure with a covered porch that wrapped around two sides, windows that gleamed in the sunlight, and a stone chimney rising from the roof. Behind it stood a barn, a stable, corrals with split-rail fencing, and various outbuildings. A creek ran along the eastern edge of the property, lined with willows that provided shade and greenery. Beyond the buildings, grassland stretched toward the mountains, dotted with grazing cattle. Benjamin pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the house, and they sat in silence for a moment. Natalie could hardly breathe. This was the home Thomas had prepared for her, the life he had offered. And now he was gone, and all of it hung in the balance, waiting for her decision. "It's a good spread," Benjamin said quietly. "About 400 acres, decent water rights, soil that's good for hay." He had 30 head of cattle, 6 horses, chickens, a couple of milk cows. "It's not the biggest ranch in the valley, but it's well managed and profitable. Thomas worked hard to build it up." "I don't know anything about running a ranch," Natalie said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You could hire someone to manage it, take a share of the profits, or you could sell it. The land alone would bring a good price. There are several ranchers who'd be interested in expanding their holdings." He climbed down from the wagon and came around to help her down. "But you should at least see inside before you decide anything." The front door was unlocked, and Benjamin pushed it open, stepping back to let Natalie enter first. The interior took her breath away. The main room was spacious and light-filled, with large windows and walls of golden logs. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, with comfortable chairs arranged before it. The furniture was simple but well made, and everywhere she looked, she saw evidence of care and preparation. Curtains hung at the windows, rugs covered the floors, and in the kitchen area she found dishes neatly arranged on shelves, a cast iron stove, and a table with 4 chairs. He built that table himself, Benjamin said from behind her. Worked on it all winter, said he wanted it to be perfect. Natalie ran her fingers over the smooth wood, feeling the craftsmanship in every joint and curve. There were 2 bedrooms, one clearly meant to be the master bedroom with a large bed and a wardrobe, the other smaller and furnished as a guest room or future nursery. Everything was clean and ready, waiting for a life that would never happen. She walked back out onto the porch, needing air, needing space to think. Benjamin followed but kept a respectful distance, leaning against the porch railing and looking out over the land. "What would you do?" Natalie asked. "If you were in my position," he took his time answering, clearly weighing his words. "I can't answer that, Miss Porter. It depends on what you want from life. If you want security, you could sell this place and go back east with enough money to live comfortably for years. If you want independence and are willing to learn, you could keep it and make a life here. There's no wrong answer." "But there's a right one," Natalie said. "I just don't know what it is yet." "Then take your time figuring it out. Mr. Davidson is staying in town for a few days. You don't have to decide this minute." They returned to Montrose in thoughtful silence, and Benjamin dropped her back at the boarding house just as Vera was setting out lunch. Natalie's mind was spinning with possibilities and impossibilities, dreams and fears all tangled together. She spent the afternoon working on Caroline's dress, letting her hands stay busy while her thoughts churned. That evening, she met with Mr. Davidson in the boarding house parlor. He was a portly man with kind eyes and a brisk professional manner. He laid out all the details of Thomas's estate with patient clarity, answering her questions and explaining her options. When he left an hour later, Natalie felt no closer to a decision but at least better informed. Over the next few days, Natalie fell into a routine that felt almost normal. She worked on mending in the mornings, helped Vera with household tasks, and spent her afternoons sewing Caroline's dress, which was turning out beautifully. She began to know the rhythms of the boarding house and the town beyond it. People nodded to her on the street, and she started to recognize faces if not yet names. Benjamin came by every day, sometimes with a practical reason like bringing fresh eggs from his ranch or offering to take her to meet Mr. Davidson again. Sometimes with no reason at all, except to sit on the porch and talk while she sewed. They talked about everything and nothing. His childhood growing up on his father's ranch, her life in Philadelphia, books they had read, places they hoped to see someday, the way the mountains looked different in every light. He made her laugh with stories about stubborn horses and cleverer than expected cattle. She told him about her father's love of poetry and her mother's beautiful singing voice. "You miss them," Benjamin observed one afternoon, watching her face as she talked about her parents. "Every day," Natalie admitted. "I keep thinking I should write to tell my mother something, and then I remember. It's the small losses that hurt most sometimes, the everyday things you took for granted." "I know what you mean. When my father died, I'd catch myself heading to the barn to ask his opinion about something, and then it would hit me all over again that he was gone." Benjamin was quiet for a moment. "But the pain gets gentler with time. You learn to carry it differently." As the week drew to a close, Natalie realized she had been in Montrose for 6 days and still had not made a decision about the ranch. Part of her wanted to run back to Philadelphia, back to familiar ground where at least she knew the dangers and pitfalls. But another part of her, growing stronger each day, wanted to stay. She liked Vera's straightforward kindness and Caroline's cheerful friendship. She liked the way people in town were starting to greet her by name. She liked the clean air and the vast sky and the mountains that seemed to promise something she could not quite name. And she liked Benjamin Hayes, more than was probably wise given how recently she had arrived, and how complicated her situation remained. On the 7th morning, she woke with a clear head and a decision made. She dressed carefully in her gray dress, pinned her hair up with extra care, and went to find Benjamin. He was easy to locate, standing outside the livery stable talking to the blacksmith about a horse that needed shoeing. "Mr. Hayes," she said, and he turned immediately, his face lighting up at the sight of her. "Could I speak with you privately?" They walked to the edge of town, following a path that led toward the creek. The morning was cool, the air sweet with the scent of wild roses blooming in the shade of the cottonwoods. "I've made my decision," Natalie said. "I'm going to accept the inheritance and keep the ranch, or at least try to keep it. I'll need help, obviously. I'll need someone to teach me what I don't know and manage things I can't handle myself, but I want to try." Benjamin stopped walking and turned to face her fully. "Are you sure? It's a hard life ranching. Long hours, unpredictable weather, 1,000 things that can go wrong." "I'm sure," she said, and realized as she spoke that it was true. "I came here for a new beginning, and that's what I'm going to have, just not the way I expected." A slow smile spread across his face. "Then you're going to need a ranch manager. I'd like to apply for the job." Natalie blinked in surprise. "But you have your own ranch." "I've been thinking about this for days," Benjamin said. "My place is smaller than Thomas's and the land isn't as good for cattle. I could sell it pretty easily, invest the money in expanding Thomas's herd, or your herd, I should say. We could combine the operations, work together to build something bigger and better than either ranch is on its own." He paused, then added carefully, "I'm not asking for charity, Miss Porter. This would be a business arrangement. I'd work for a salary plus a percentage of the profits. Everything legal and proper, all written down in a contract." "Why would you do that?" Natalie asked, searching his face. He met her gaze steadily. "Because I think you're brave as hell for choosing to stay, because Thomas would have wanted someone to help you succeed. And because I like the idea of building something worthwhile, something that matters." He hesitated, then added more softly, "And because I'd like to spend more time getting to know you, if I'm being completely honest." Natalie's heart did something complicated in her chest, a flutter of fear and hope mixed together. "I'd like that too," she admitted. "Getting to know you, I mean, but I don't want to rush into anything. I've been in Colorado for a week. My head is still spinning." "No rush," Benjamin agreed. "We'll take it slow, figure things out as we go. First things first, let's get the legal matters settled and start planning how to run the ranch. The rest can sort itself out in its own time." They went together to see Mr. Davidson, who drew up a contract that satisfied both of them. Benjamin would manage the ranch operations in exchange for a modest salary and 20% of the profits. All major decisions would be made jointly. The arrangement would be reviewed after 1 year to see if it was working for both parties. Natalie signed her name with a steady hand, and just like that, she became a property owner and Benjamin became her business partner. The next few weeks passed in a whirlwind of activity. Benjamin sold his ranch to a young couple from Kansas, who were thrilled to find a well-maintained property at a fair price. He moved his belongings and his best horses to what Natalie still thought of as Thomas's ranch, but was trying to think of as hers. They hired a young man named Jack to help with the daily labor, a hard-working kid of 19, who had been working odd jobs around town and jumped at the chance for steady employment. Natalie moved out of the boarding house and into the ranch, taking the smaller bedroom and leaving the master bedroom closed. It felt wrong somehow to take that room, to sleep in the bed Thomas had bought with their marriage in mind. Benjamin tactfully said nothing about her choice, instead setting up a cot in one of the outbuildings for himself to preserve propriety. Benjamin proved to be an excellent teacher. patient with her ignorance and generous with his knowledge. He showed her how to check the cattle for signs of illness, how to mend fence, how to read the weather in the clouds and the behavior of the animals. She learned to gather eggs without getting pecked, to milk the cows without bruising them, to throw hay from the loft without killing her back. Her hands, soft from years of sewing, became calloused and strong. Her skin darkened from the sun despite the hat she wore. Her body ached in new ways at the end of each day, but it was the good ache of useful work. And slowly, carefully, she and Benjamin became friends. They worked side by side during the day and sat on the porch in the evenings, talking while the sun set behind the mountains in displays of color that never failed to take Natalie's breath away. He told her about his dreams of breeding horses, developing a line known for strength and intelligence. She told him about the dress shop she had once imagined owning in Philadelphia before her parents died and her dreams had to become more practical. "You could still do that," Benjamin said one evening. "Have a dress shop, I mean. Montrose is growing. Women need nice dresses, not just practical ones. You could set up a small shop in town, take orders, build a reputation." "I don't have time for that now," Natalie replied, but the idea planted itself in her mind, taking root. Summer deepened into its fullest heat and the ranch flourished. The cattle fattened on good grass. The garden Natalie planted behind the house produced abundant vegetables, and the bank account slowly grew as they sold cream and eggs in town. Natalie found she had a head for figures and enjoyed keeping the books, tracking income and expenses with meticulous care. She also found herself watching Benjamin more than was probably appropriate. The way his shirt pulled across his shoulders when he lifted something heavy. The way he laughed, throwing his head back unselfconsciously. The way he was gentle with the animals and patient with young Jack when the boy made mistakes. The way he looked at her sometimes when he thought she was not watching, his expression soft and full of something that made her breath catch. One evening in late July, they were sitting on the porch after supper, enjoying the relative cool that came with sunset. Benjamin had been teaching her to play chess, and they had a game set up on a small table between their chairs. Natalie was studying the board, trying to see the strategy he insisted was there when he spoke suddenly. "I'm glad you stayed," he said. "In Montrose, I mean. I know it's been hard learning everything, working from dawn to dusk, but I'm glad you gave this place a chance." She looked up from the chess pieces to find him watching her with that soft expression again. "I'm glad too," she said. "I never expected to be happy here. I came west prepared to make the best of things, to fulfill my obligation to Thomas. But somewhere along the way this became more than obligation. It became home. Home is the people as much as the place," Benjamin said quietly. "Yes," Natalie agreed, her heart beating faster. "It is." He reached across the table and took her hand, his thumb brushing gently over her knuckles. "Natalie, I know we agreed to take things slow, and I meant that. But I need you to know that my feelings for you have become a lot more than friendship and partnership. You don't have to feel the same way, and it won't change our working relationship if you don't, but I wanted to be honest with you." Natalie looked down at their joined hands, at the contrast between his sun-darkened skin and her paler fingers, both marked now with the evidence of hard work. "I feel the same way," she admitted. "I have for a while now, but I felt guilty about it." "Guilty? Why?" "Because I came here to marry Thomas. Because my feelings for you feel like a betrayal of his memory, even though I never met him, even though he's gone. It doesn't make logical sense, but emotions rarely do." Benjamin squeezed her hand gently. "Thomas would want you to be happy. He was that kind of man. And besides, this isn't the life he planned for you. You've built something new here, something that's yours. You don't owe the past anything except respect." She looked up at him, at his kind, honest face, and felt something inside her relax, some knot of tension she had been carrying finally loosening. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now we keep doing what we've been doing, but with honesty between us. We work together, we build this ranch, and we see where our feelings lead. And when we're both ready, when enough time has passed and it feels right, maybe we talk about making this partnership permanent in every way." Natalie felt tears prick her eyes, but they were good tears, the kind that came from relief and hope rather than grief. "I'd like that," she whispered. He stood and pulled her gently to her feet, then wrapped his arms around her in a hug that felt like coming home. She pressed her face against his chest, breathing in the scent of him, clean sweat and leather and sunshine. They stood like that for a long time, holding each other while the stars came out overhead and the mountains darkened to purple silhouettes against the sky. August arrived with thunderstorms that rolled down from the mountains in the afternoons, bringing brief, violent rain that left the air smelling of sage and damp earth. Natalie and Benjamin grew more comfortable with their acknowledged feelings, finding small ways to show affection. A hand on the shoulder in passing, sitting close together on the porch, the casual intimacy of shared looks and inside jokes. They did not kiss, did not push beyond the boundaries of propriety, but the promise of future intimacy hummed between them like a plucked string. In mid-August, Vera arrived at the ranch driving her own wagon, a large basket covered with a cloth sitting beside her on the seat. Natalie, who had been working in the garden, straightened up in surprise. "Vera, what brings you out here?" "Meddling, mostly," Vera said cheerfully, climbing down from the wagon. "But also friendship. I brought lunch for all of you, and I wanted to see what you've done with the place." They ate together in the shade of the porch, Vera, Natalie, Benjamin, and Jack, feasting on fried chicken, potato salad, biscuits, and pie. Vera kept up a stream of town gossip that had all of them laughing, but when the men went back to work, she turned serious eyes on Natalie. "You look happy," she observed. "Different from that girl who stepped off the train wearing widow's weeds." "I am happy," Natalie said. "Happier than I expected to be. Benjamin Hayes is a good man. If that's the direction things are heading, you have my blessing, not that you need it. But I wanted you to know I approve." Vera paused, then added, "People in town have been talking, as people do. Most of it is approving. You're working hard, behaving respectably, contributing to the community. But there are a few who think it's unseemly, you living out here with Benjamin, even with young Jack as a chaperone." Natalie felt her cheeks flush. "We're not doing anything wrong. I know that, and anyone with sense knows that. But appearances matter, especially for a woman in your position. I'm not saying you should change anything. I'm just saying be aware that tongues are wagging." After Vera left, Natalie found herself troubled by the conversation. She mentioned it to Benjamin that evening, and his jaw tightened with anger. "People need to mind their own business," he said tersely. "We're running a ranch, not conducting some kind of scandal." "Maybe I should move back to the boarding house," Natalie suggested, though the thought made her heart sink. "Just until we're married. Are we getting married?" Benjamin asked, and though his tone was light, she could see the intensity in his eyes. "I thought that was the direction we were heading," Natalie said carefully. "It is, but I haven't properly asked you yet. I wanted to wait a bit longer, make sure you were certain." He turned to face her fully. "But if the only thing stopping me from asking is wanting to give you more time and you're ready now, then maybe waiting doesn't make sense anymore." Natalie's heart began to pound. "Are you asking me now?" "Not yet, but soon." He smiled at her, warm and sure. "When I ask you to marry me, Natalie Porter, I want to do it right. Not because of gossip or propriety, but because it's what we both want, when we both want it." 2 days later, Benjamin rode into town on an errand and returned in the late afternoon with a small box in his pocket. He found Natalie in the barn, brushing down one of the horses after a long ride checking fence lines. She looked up as he approached, smiling, then froze when she saw his expression. "Come outside," he said quietly. "There's something I want to show you." He led her out behind the barn where wildflowers grew thick and colorful, nodding in the breeze. The mountains rose in the distance, majestic and eternal, and the sky was that particular shade of blue that only seemed to exist in Colorado. Benjamin took both her hands in his, looking down at her with an expression that made her breath catch. "When you stepped off that train 2 months ago, I saw a woman who was grieving and lost and trying to be brave," he said. "And I thought if I could just help her get back on her feet, that would be enough. I had no idea I was about to meet the most remarkable person I'd ever known. You came to this place with nothing, Natalie, and you turned it into everything. You learned things that scared you. You worked harder than anyone I've ever seen. You took on challenges that would have broken most people, and you did it with grace and grit and good humor." He released one of her hands to reach into his pocket, pulling out the small box. "I went to Denver 2 weeks ago. Told you I was going to look at breeding stock, which was true, but that wasn't the only reason. I went to a jeweler and had this made." He opened the box to reveal a ring, simple and beautiful. A single green stone, the color of new leaves or mountain meadows, set in a band of silver worked with an intricate pattern of vines and flowers. "It's peridot," Benjamin explained. "The jeweler told me it symbolizes renewal and new beginnings. Seemed fitting for us." "This isn't Thomas's life you're living, Natalie. It's yours. Ours if you'll have me. Will you marry me? Will you build this life with me, not as my employee or my business partner, but as my wife?" Tears were streaming down Natalie's face, but she was smiling so hard her cheeks hurt. "Yes," she said. "Yes, absolutely yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger and it fit perfectly, the green stone catching the late afternoon light. Then he pulled her close and kissed her for the first time, soft and sweet and full of promise. Natalie wrapped her arms around his neck and kissed him back, pouring into it all the feelings she had been holding inside for weeks. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Benjamin rested his forehead against hers. "How soon can we get married?" he asked. "Because suddenly waiting seems like the worst idea in the world," she laughed. "We need to do this properly. Post the banns, let people know, give me time to make a decent dress. A month at least." "A month," Benjamin groaned. "That's 30 days. 29 now," Natalie pointed out. "It's afternoon." He laughed and kissed her again, and they stood there among the wildflowers as the sun began its slow descent toward the mountains, planning their future with joy and certainty. The news of their engagement spread through Montrose like wildfire, and the reaction was overwhelmingly positive. Vera hugged Natalie so hard she could barely breathe. Caroline squealed with delight and immediately started planning what she would wear to the wedding. Even taciturn Samuel Jennings offered his congratulations and said something about it being a sensible match. Natalie threw herself into preparations, working late into the night to sew her wedding dress. She chose a soft blue fabric, practical but pretty, with lace at the collar and cuffs that she had saved from her mother's wedding dress. It was nothing like the elaborate gown she had once dreamed of making for other brides, but it was perfect for her new life, simple and honest and beautiful in its own way. Benjamin, meanwhile, worked on the house, finally opening up the master bedroom and transforming it into a space that would belong to both of them. He built a new wardrobe to hold Natalie's clothes, installed shelves for her books, and even carved a small jewelry box to hold the few pieces she owned. The bed Thomas had bought remained, but Benjamin built a new headboard, making it their own. The month passed in a blur of activity and anticipation. They set the date for September 15th, a Saturday. Reverend Collins would perform the ceremony in the church, followed by a reception at the boarding house that Vera insisted on hosting. The whole town was invited, and it seemed like the whole town planned to attend. On the morning of her wedding, Natalie woke in the small bedroom she had been occupying, knowing it would be the last time she slept there alone. Caroline and Vera had stayed over the night before to help her prepare, and they descended on her with enthusiasm, helping her into her dress, arranging her hair, making sure every detail was perfect. "You look beautiful," Caroline said, standing back to admire their work. Natalie looked at herself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman looking back. Her skin was golden from the sun, her eyes bright with happiness, her body strong and capable under the blue dress. She looked like someone who belonged here in this place with this life. "I'm ready," she said. The church was packed when they arrived, every pew full of friendly faces. Someone had decorated with wildflowers and ribbons, transforming the simple space into something magical. And at the front, standing beside Reverend Collins, was Benjamin, looking so handsome in his best suit that Natalie felt her heart turn over. She walked down the aisle alone by choice, carrying a bouquet of wildflowers Benjamin had picked that morning. When she reached the front and took his hand, he whispered, "You're the most beautiful thing I've ever seen." The ceremony was simple and heartfelt. They spoke their vows with clear voices and steady eyes, promising to love and cherish each other through whatever life brought. When Reverend Collins pronounced them husband and wife, Benjamin kissed her with a tenderness that brought tears to more than one eye in the congregation. The reception at the boarding house was a joyous affair, with food and music and dancing that lasted well into the evening. Natalie danced with Benjamin, with Jack, with Samuel Jennings, with half the men in town. She accepted congratulations and good wishes from what seemed like every resident of Montrose. And through it all, she felt Benjamin's gaze on her, warm and possessive and full of love. As the party wound down and the sky began to darken, they slipped away, riding back to the ranch in Benjamin's wagon under a sky full of stars. Jack had tactfully decided to spend the night in town, giving them privacy. The house was quiet and welcoming when they arrived, lamps left burning to light their way. Benjamin carried Natalie over the threshold, making her laugh, then set her down gently in the main room. "Welcome home, Mrs. Hayes," he said softly. "I've been home for months," Natalie replied, reaching up to touch his face. "But this is different. Better." He kissed her then, deep and slow, and she kissed him back with all the love and desire she had been holding in check. They made their way to the bedroom, helping each other out of their wedding clothes with a mixture of nervousness and eagerness. Benjamin was gentle and patient, and Natalie felt nothing but rightness as they came together. Two people who had found each other against all odds, creating something new and precious. Afterward, lying in the darkness with her head on Benjamin's chest and his arm around her shoulders, Natalie thought about the journey that had brought her here. The grief of losing her parents, the desperate decision to become a mail-order bride, the shock of Thomas's death, the uncertainty of those first days in Montrose. Every step had been necessary, leading her to this moment, this man, this life. "What are you thinking about?" Benjamin murmured, his fingers tracing patterns on her shoulder. "How strange life is," Natalie said. "How we plan and hope and dream, and then everything happens differently than we expected. But sometimes differently is better." "Sometimes different is perfect," Benjamin agreed. He pulled her closer, kissing the top of her head. "I love you, Natalie Hayes." "I love you too," she whispered. More than I knew it was possible to love someone. The fall passed in golden contentment as Natalie and Benjamin settled into married life. They worked the ranch together, their partnership deepening now that they shared everything: work and meals, conversation and silence, bed and board. The cattle were in prime condition for the fall market, and they made an excellent profit selling a portion of the herd to buyers from Denver. Benjamin's horse breeding program began in earnest with the acquisition of a fine stallion with excellent bloodlines. In November, Natalie realized she was pregnant. She felt the knowledge settle into her bones one morning as she stood in the kitchen, suddenly understanding why she had been so tired lately, why certain smells made her queasy. When she told Benjamin that evening, he picked her up and spun her around, laughing with pure joy. "A baby," he kept saying. "We're going to have a baby." "In the spring," Natalie confirmed. "Late May or early June, I think." He set her down carefully, suddenly treating her like she was made of glass. "You need to rest more, no more heavy work. We'll hire more help if we need to." "I'm pregnant, not dying," Natalie said with amusement. "I can still work, but maybe a little less strenuously than before." Winter arrived with snow that blanketed the ranch in pristine white, transforming the landscape into something from a fairy tale. The work became harder, breaking ice on water troughs, feeding cattle who huddled together for warmth, keeping the paths clear. But the house stayed warm and cozy, and Natalie spent the long winter evenings sewing baby clothes by the fire while Benjamin read aloud from the books she had loved as a child. In February, a letter arrived from Margaret in California, responding to the news Natalie had sent months before about her marriage. Her sister wrote that she was thrilled Natalie had found happiness, that she hoped to visit in the summer and meet her new brother-in-law. Reading the letter, Natalie felt the last piece of her old life click into place with her new one, past and present finally reconciled. Spring came late that year, with cold weather lingering into April, but when it finally arrived, it was glorious. The wildflowers returned, carpeting the meadows in color. The cattle dropped their calves and Benjamin's mare foaled, producing a leggy colt with his mother's intelligent eyes. And Natalie grew round with their child, her body changing in ways that fascinated and occasionally alarmed Benjamin. "Are you supposed to be that size?" he asked one evening in late May, eyeing her belly with concern. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time," Natalie said patiently. "I'm fine. Everything is normal." He still looked worried, but he had learned not to argue with her when she used that particular tone. The baby came on a warm June night, arriving with startling speed after a labor that lasted only 5 hours. The midwife Vera had brought from town barely arrived in time. When Benjamin heard the baby's first cry, he burst into the room despite protocol, desperate to make sure Natalie was all right. "You have a son," the midwife announced, handing him the squalling, red-faced bundle. Benjamin looked down at his son with an expression of wonder and terror. "He's so small. He's 8 pounds, the midwife said with amusement. "That's a good size." Natalie, exhausted but radiant, held out her arms. "Let me see him." Benjamin placed the baby carefully in her arms, then sat on the edge of the bed, one arm around Natalie's shoulders as they both stared at the miracle they had created. The baby had a shock of dark hair and eyes that would probably turn the same honey brown as his father's. His tiny fist waved in the air as he continued to cry, expressing his displeasure at being thrust into this bright, cold world. "Hello, little one," Natalie whispered. "Welcome to the world. We're your parents and we love you more than anything." The baby quieted at the sound of her voice, his unfocused eyes trying to find the source of the sound. Benjamin reached out a finger and the baby's hand closed around it reflexively. "What should we name him?" Benjamin asked. They had discussed names for months without settling on anything, but now, looking at their son, Natalie knew exactly what felt right. "Thomas," she said. "Thomas Benjamin Hayes, after the man who brought me here and the man who made me happy, past and future together." Benjamin's eyes filled with tears. "Thomas," he repeated, "that's perfect." The baby Thomas grew like a weed thriving in the mountain air. He was a happy child, quick to smile and slow to fuss, content to be carried in a sling on Natalie's back while she worked or to sleep in a cradle Benjamin had built in the shade of the porch. The ranch flourished alongside him. Benjamin's horse breeding program gained a reputation for quality, and buyers came from as far away as Denver to purchase his animals. The cattle herd grew, and they acquired more land, expanding their holdings until the ranch was one of the most prosperous in the valley. When Thomas was 6 months old, Margaret arrived for a long-promised visit, bringing her husband and their 2-year-old daughter. The sisters fell into each other's arms crying and laughing, the years and miles between them dissolving in an instant. Margaret stayed for 2 weeks, and by the time she left, she and Benjamin had become fast friends, and the cousins had bonded despite the age difference. "You found exactly what you needed," Margaret said to Natalie the day before she left. "I'm so happy for you, Nat. This life suits you." "It does," Natalie agreed, watching Benjamin play with Thomas in the grass, the baby shrieking with laughter as his father made silly faces. "I never imagined this, never dreamed it was possible, but it's everything I didn't know I wanted." Time seemed to move differently now, measured not in days or weeks, but in milestones and seasons. Thomas took his first steps in the spring when he was 10 months old, walking from Natalie to Benjamin with a look of intense concentration on his chubby face. He said his first word, "Dada," in the summer, much to Benjamin's delight and Natalie's mock indignation. His second word was "Mama," and then the floodgates opened, and he never stopped talking. When Thomas was 18 months old, Natalie discovered she was pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was harder, the sickness lasting well into the 4th month, the exhaustion more profound. But Benjamin picked up the slack without complaint, taking over more of her tasks and making sure she rested when she needed to. The second baby, a girl they named Sarah after Natalie's mother, arrived on a snowy February morning. She was smaller than Thomas had been, more delicate, with pale skin and light brown hair that would eventually turn blonde. Where Thomas was boisterous and fearless, Sarah was quiet and observant, watching the world with solemn eyes that missed nothing. "2 children," Benjamin said one evening, holding Sarah while Thomas climbed all over him like he was a jungle gym. "We're outnumbered now." "Speak for yourself," Natalie said with amusement. "I'm keeping up just fine." But secretly she was tired in a way she had never been before, the demands of 2 small children and a working ranch taking their toll. She said nothing, not wanting to worry Benjamin, but he noticed anyway. He always noticed. "We need more help," he announced one morning. "Permanent help, not just Jack. Someone who can take over more of the day-to-day work so you can focus on the children and I can focus on the horses." They hired a couple, Robert and Hannah Miller, newly married and looking for an opportunity. Robert had grown up on a cattle ranch in Wyoming and knew the work inside and out. Hannah was a skilled cook and didn't mind helping with the children when needed. They moved into the cabin Benjamin built for them near the barn, and their presence transformed the ranch, making everything run more smoothly. The years flowed by, marked by the changing seasons and the growth of their children. Thomas grew into a sturdy boy who loved the ranch and followed his father everywhere, pestering him with endless questions about horses and cattle. Sarah developed into a serious, intelligent child who preferred books to outdoor work, but could rope a calf as well as any cowhand when necessary. They had a third child, another boy named Daniel, who split the difference between his siblings, equally happy working with the animals or sitting inside reading. Natalie finally opened her dress shop in town when Daniel started school, setting up in a small building next to the general store. It started as just a few hours a week, taking orders and doing fittings, but word of her skill spread, and soon women were coming from surrounding towns to commission dresses from her. She hired Caroline, who had left teaching after marrying Samuel Jennings, to help with the simpler work, and together they built a thriving business. Benjamin's horse breeding program became renowned throughout Colorado, his animals prized for their strength, intelligence, and calm temperaments. He traveled occasionally to shows and auctions, always bringing back stories and often bringing back new bloodlines to improve the herd. But he never stayed away long, always eager to return home to Natalie and the children. One evening in late summer when Thomas was 15, Sarah was 13, and Daniel was 10, they sat together on the porch as they had done countless times before. The children were in bed, the work was done, and the mountains glowed pink in the sunset. Benjamin reached over and took Natalie's hand, and she laced her fingers through his, the gesture as natural and comfortable as breathing. "You ever think about that day you arrived?" Benjamin asked. "Stepping off the train in your morning dress, looking so lost." "Sometimes," Natalie admitted. "It feels like another lifetime, another person almost." "You were brave even then," Benjamin said. "You just didn't know it yet." "I was terrified," Natalie corrected, "but you made me feel safe. You gave me room to find my feet, to figure out who I wanted to be." "We found each other," Benjamin said simply. "That's what happened. Two people who needed exactly what the other could give. I know you came here to marry Thomas, and I'll always be grateful to him for placing that advertisement, for corresponding with you, for bringing you west. But I'm selfishly glad it worked out the way it did." "Me too," Natalie said softly. "Though I wish he could have found his happiness too. He deserved it." "He'd be proud of what you've done with his ranch," Benjamin said. "How you've built it into something amazing." "We built it," Natalie corrected. "Together. Everything we have, we made together." As the stars began to appear overhead, they sat in comfortable silence, hands clasped. Two people who had found each other in the most unlikely circumstances and built a life of love, work, and purpose. The ranch stretched out around them, prosperous and peaceful, a testament to their partnership and perseverance. Inside the house, their children slept safely in their beds. In town, Natalie's dress shop stood closed until morning, when she would return to create beautiful things with her skilled hands. In the pastures, Benjamin's horses grazed contentedly, the fruits of his knowledge and dedication. The years continued to pass, bringing changes and challenges, joys and sorrows. Thomas grew into a fine young man who took over more and more of the ranch operations, proving to have his father's instinct for horses and his mother's head for business. Sarah surprised everyone by developing a passion for veterinary medicine after nursing an injured colt back to health, and she eventually left for college in Denver, the first person in the family to pursue higher education. Daniel found his calling in carpentry, his clever hands able to build anything from furniture to barn structures. Natalie and Benjamin grew older together, their hair turning gray, their faces lined with the evidence of years spent outdoors in sun and wind. But they never lost the connection forged in those early days when everything was uncertain and new. They still sat on the porch in the evenings, still talked about everything and nothing, still reached for each other in the darkness. Their love had deepened and matured, becoming something richer and more complex than the initial spark of attraction. Something built on shared experience and mutual respect, and the kind of intimacy that only comes from truly knowing another person. On their 20th anniversary, Benjamin took Natalie back to the train station in Montrose. It was much larger now, a proper depot serving a town that had grown from a dusty frontier settlement into a prosperous community. They stood on the platform where they had first met, and Benjamin pulled a small box from his pocket. "I got you something," he said, opening it to reveal a pair of earrings, each holding a peridot stone that matched her engagement ring. 20 years of new beginnings. Natalie felt tears prick her eyes, the good kind that came from overwhelming happiness. "You old romantic," she said, touching his face tenderly. 20 years and you still find ways to surprise me." 20 years and I still can't believe my luck," Benjamin replied. He pulled her close, kissing her right there on the platform with people walking past and not caring one bit about propriety or appearances. When they broke apart, both smiling, he said, "Thank you for stepping off that train, Natalie. Thank you for being brave enough to stay. Thank you for building this life with me. Thank you for being there to meet me," Natalie replied. "Thank you for seeing past the morning dress to the person underneath. Thank you for giving me time and space and then giving me everything else." As they walked back through town, arm in arm, Natalie thought about the woman she had been when she arrived, grieving and uncertain, wearing black for a man she never knew. That woman had been transformed by this place, by the work and the land, and most of all by the love of the man beside her. She had come west expecting duty and gotten joy instead. She had come seeking survival and found abundance. She had come mourning one ending and discovered instead that new beginnings start exactly where you stand, if you're brave enough to reach for them. The children married in their time, bringing new people into the family fold. Thomas wed a rancher's daughter from the next valley over, a strong, capable woman named Emily who fit seamlessly into their lives. They gave Natalie and Benjamin 3 grandchildren who spent summers at the ranch, learning the same lessons their father had learned, carrying on the traditions. Sarah married a veterinarian she met in Denver, and though they lived in the city, they visited often, their 2 children as fascinated by ranch life as city children always were. Daniel married a schoolteacher in Montrose and built them a beautiful house on the edge of town, filling it with children and laughter, and the furniture he crafted with his skilled hands. Benjamin's health began to fail when he was in his early 60s, his heart growing weaker despite his still strong will. The doctors in Denver said there was nothing to be done except rest and reduce stress, so he gradually turned over more of the ranch operations to Thomas while he focused on gentler pursuits. He still sat on the porch every evening with Natalie, still held her hand, still told her he loved her every single day. "No regrets," he said to her one evening when the sunset was particularly beautiful, painting the mountains in shades of gold and rose. "Not one. Everything about our life together has been exactly right." "Not one regret," Natalie agreed, though her voice was thick with emotions she was trying to keep contained. She knew what he was really saying, knew that he was preparing her for what was coming, and she wanted to rage against it, to demand more time. But they had been given 27 years together, which was more than many couples got, and they had filled those years with so much love and laughter and life that they could have filled 50. Benjamin died peacefully in his sleep on a cold January night, with Natalie beside him as she had been for over a quarter century. She woke in the darkness knowing immediately that something was wrong, knowing even before she reached for him that he was gone. The grief was overwhelming, a physical pain that took her breath away. But underneath the grief was gratitude, deep and abiding, for everything they had shared. The funeral was held in the Montrose church, which was packed with people whose lives Benjamin had touched. Ranchers and businessmen, townsfolk and strangers, all came to pay their respects to a man who had been unfailingly kind, honest, and decent. Natalie stood at the front with her children and grandchildren around her, accepting condolences with dignity and grace, drawing strength from the love that surrounded her. In the weeks that followed, she found comfort in routine and in the presence of her family. Thomas insisted she move into the main house on the ranch with him and Emily, but Natalie refused. This was her home, hers and Benjamin's, and she was not ready to leave it. Instead, Thomas came by every day checking on her, making sure she was all right, sometimes just sitting with her in companionable silence. Spring came eventually, as it always did, bringing new life to the ranch. The wildflowers bloomed in the meadow behind the barn where Benjamin had proposed all those years ago, and Natalie walked among them, remembering. She wore the peridot ring and earrings, touching them often as if they could connect her to the man who had given them to her. Slowly, the sharp edge of grief dulled to something more manageable, something she could carry without being crushed by the weight. She returned to her dress shop, finding solace in the familiar work of cutting and stitching, creating beauty with her hands. She spent time with her grandchildren, telling them stories about their grandfather, keeping his memory alive. She sat on the porch in the evenings, sometimes alone, sometimes with Thomas or one of the other children, watching the sun set behind the mountains and feeling grateful for everything she had been given. On what would have been her 30th anniversary, Natalie stood on the train platform in Montrose, the same platform where she had arrived so many years ago. She was 73 years old now, her hair completely white, her hands gnarled with age and arthritis. But her mind was clear, and her heart was full as she remembered that younger version of herself, stepping off the train in black mourning, frightened and alone. New beginnings start here, Benjamin had told her that day, and he had been so right. Everything good in her life had started here, on this platform, in this town, in this wild and beautiful place. She had come west expecting nothing and received everything. She had come mourning death and found life instead, abundant and rich and full of love. The train whistle sounded in the distance, and Natalie watched as it pulled into the station, just as hers had done 30 years before. Passengers disembarked, some greeted by loved ones, others stepping out into uncertainty. Among them was a young woman traveling alone, carrying a worn suitcase and looking around with wide, anxious eyes. She reminded Natalie of herself at that age, and on impulse, Natalie approached her. "Welcome to Montrose," she said with a warm smile. "Is someone meeting you, or do you need help finding your way?" The young woman's face flooded with relief. "I'm looking for the boarding house. I have a position as a seamstress, but I don't know where to go." "Come with me," Natalie said, offering her arm. "I know the way very well. In fact, I'm a seamstress too. We'll get you settled, and then you can tell me all about yourself. Montrose is a good town, full of good people. I think you're going to be very happy here." As they walked together down the street, Natalie thought about the circle of life and the way stories echoed through generations. She had been helped when she arrived, frightened and lost, and now she could offer that same help to someone else. Benjamin would have approved, she thought. He had always believed in paying forward the kindness you received. That evening, back in her home on the ranch, Natalie sat on the porch and watched the familiar mountains turn purple in the twilight. Around her were all the evidences of a life well lived. The prosperous ranch, the successful business, the children and grandchildren who carried on the legacy she and Benjamin had built. Inside the house were photographs and mementos, each one telling a story, each one precious. She touched the peridot ring, feeling its familiar weight and remembering the day Benjamin had slipped it onto her finger. "New beginnings," she whispered to the gathering darkness. "You gave me that, Benjamin. You gave me everything." And as the stars began to appear overhead, the same stars that had witnessed their courtship and marriage, their struggles and triumphs, Natalie Hayes smiled. Her life had not turned out anything like she had planned when she left Philadelphia all those years ago. It had been harder in some ways, richer in others, and infinitely more rewarding than anything she could have imagined. She had come west to marry a stranger and ended up marrying her soulmate. She had come seeking security and found love instead. She had come wearing mourning and discovered joy that lasted a lifetime. The mourning dress was long gone, packed away or given away years ago. She had no need for it anymore. Everything that had ended when she stepped off that train had been necessary to make room for everything that began. And what had begun was a love story for the ages, a partnership that transformed not just two lives but an entire family, a ranch, a community. As Natalie rose to go inside, moving slowly but steadily, she whispered one final thought into the night. "Thank you, Thomas Whitfield, for bringing me here. And thank you, Benjamin Hayes, for everything that came after. I have been blessed beyond measure." She closed the door behind her, shutting out the darkness but keeping all the light inside, all the love and memory and gratitude that filled every corner of the home she had built with the man she loved. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new joys, as every day did. Her grandchildren would visit, her children would call, the ranch would require attention, and the dress shop would need her skilled hands. Life would continue its steady forward march, as it always had and always would. But tonight, Natalie Hayes went to sleep in the bed she had shared with her husband for 27 years, wrapped in quilts her grandmother had made and memories that would last forever. She slept peacefully, dreaming of wildflowers and mountain sunsets, of a tall man with kind eyes saying, "New beginnings start here," of a life that exceeded every expectation and fulfilled every promise. And in the morning, when she woke to another beautiful Colorado day, she would rise with gratitude and purpose, ready to embrace whatever came next, secure in the knowledge that she had lived fully and loved deeply, and that no matter what happened, she had already received more than most people ever dreamed possible. The mail-order bride who had stepped off the train in black mourning had found her happy ending, not in the way she expected, but in the way she needed. She had found home, family, purpose, and love. She had found everything that mattered. And in finding it, she had become the architect of her own remarkable life, the author of her own beautiful story, the proof that new beginnings could happen anywhere, anytime, for anyone brave enough to reach for them.